Hi everyone. This paper was done for the University of Leeds' Disability Studies Conference for 2024. Um, so in neurodivergent spaces, most specifically autistic and ADHD spaces, as well as relatively new disciplines like fandom studies, the term headcanon is used to talk about what groups of fans may imagine about a character or world in a piece of culture, like on film or on TV and so on. So that's where I plucked this paper from. That in the original series of Marvel's Jessica Jones, in 2015, and the previous Alias comics, the title character Jessica is never written by the authors as autistic, but it is something that uh, some fans imagined about her after the fact. My paper joins a plethora of other work I've been doing about mechanisms of privilege and oppression that brings areas like superhero studies and comic studies into spaces like critical race studies, white studies, and also disability studies and wider academic fields as well, including Marvel work such as The Winter Soldier, X-Men, Doctor Strange, Ms. Marvel, and many others. What got me to consider Jessica Jones was not the numbers of specialists at the time praising its representation of post-traumatic stress disorder, but seeing how autistic people talked about it on social media years after the fact, so years later. Um, it also ties quite well into my essay, Welcome to Mutant High, Neurodivergent Students at Xavier's School for the Gifted, which is available online as well, open access, where I talk about these white people who Stan Lee and Jack Kirby originally called the mutants in a context of people who look white, but often in large do not experience the levels of white privilege uh, that others who look like them do. Here, I looked at the work of academics like Emma Dabiri, Anoop Nayak, Noel Ignitin, Matthew Jacobson, Nell Irvin Painter, among others, who discuss this many shades of whiteness. In Nayak's own words, some people are whiter than others, some are not white enough, and many are inescapably cast beneath the shadow of whiteness. And for me, Jessica Jones, along with many of these powered people in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, notably also the Scarlet Witch, falls into that category of white people who are white, but not white enough compared to the other white people. Yet the paper I present to you today, wherever you're watching this from, is about Jessica Jones, a fictional personal investigator operating out of Hell's Kitchen in New York in the Marvel Universe. I think of her as an autistic character whose experiences of the world is compounded as a victim survivor of male violence, the perpetrator, Kilgrave, first appearing in the Daredevil comics as well. Um, Yet while he first appeared in Daredevil, he became Jessica's archnemesis in the 2001 Alias comics, written by Brian Bendis and illustrated by Michael Gaydos. In the comics, his body produces pheromones that give him the power that allow him to control people with his voice. However, in the series, he develops these abilities following being experimented on by his parents when he gets a neurodegenerative illness that would have killed him by 10 years old. Eventually, he develops powers that allow him to tell people to do whatever he wants them to do, basically. And then he began to use it on everybody. Kilgo's first victims, however, were his parents. We carried out his every childish demand for years, his mother says. He was throwing a tantrum, but I was busy ironing, and I never should have yelled at him, but. And that is from the penultimate episode of Series 1, aka Sin Bin. He made his parents into his personal slaves, developing a lack of empathy for human needs. At the age of 10, for example, he forced his mother to burn her own face with an iron. Eventually, he called himself Kilgrave. It's not until episode 5, aka The Sandwich Saved Me, viewers are shown how Kilgrave met Jessica. Here I am just debating where to eat, he says. And then bam, there you are, performing feats of heroism. Come here, let me look at you. Come on, Jesus, you're a vision, hair and skin. Appalling sense of fashion, but that can be remedied. But underneath it all, the power, just like me, though not quite as good, of course, he says. He makes Jessca into his slave by just using his voice. And then later on, sexually assaulting her and raping her too. Sociologist and forensic social worker Evan Stark's book, Coercive Control: How Men Entrap Women in Personal Life may be an appropriate vessel to discuss the fictional experience of Jessica Jones with Kilgrave. Yes, Kilgrave is a comic book villain, but he could well be framed as a male perpetrator as well. Early in the book, Evan Stark writes, coercive control shares general elements with other capture or course of conduct crimes such as kidnapping, stalking, and harassment, including the fact that it is ongoing and its perpetrators use various means to hurt, humiliate, intimidate, exploit, isolate, and dominate their victims. Like hostages, victims of coercive control are frequently deprived of money, food, access to communication or transportation, and other survival resources as they are cut off from family, friends, and other supports. Stark goes on to talk about how, unlike other capture crimes, coercive control is directly personal and often extends through personal spaces, i.e., the perpetrator will use family members, friends, and other close associates to get to their target. Kilgrave does this to Jessica using her friends like Malcolm and Trish. Stark also talks about time. Kilgrave keeps tabs on Jessica over several years, however, distantly, and relies on Jessica's isolated nature to get to her as well. Stark writes, like assaults, coercive control undermines a victim's physical and psychological integrity, but the main means used to establish control is the micro-regulation of everyday behaviors associated with stereotypic female roles, such as how women dress, clean, cook, socialize, care for their children, or perform sexually. He writes, the subtext to Jessica um, going out to stop Kilgrave in series one is that she was one of his victims first off and wants to stop him doing it to anyone else. Kilgrave is so obsessed with Jessica that he sends clients to her office using only his voice. Coercive control in the context of this Marvel show is not as we know it in the real world, but probably infinitely more dangerous, propelled through Kilgrave's powers as a metahuman to tell anyone to do anything he wants them to do, including eventually raping and sexually assaulting them, including Jessica and others. This program flicks between the past of what happened to Jessica and the present in her going after him when he starts attacking people closest to her to get to her. The perspective this series is told from is through the eyes of a traumatized individual, yet there are enough cues in her pre-Kilgrave life to make the case for Jessica Jones being an autistic character who also canonically has PTSD. So autism in the show is not canon, but post-traumatic stress disorder is. And also probably other forms of mental illness, not only due to male violence or exposure to it, but also due to being autistic and reactions many have to those traits, including exclusions and things like bullying as well, which are also hinted at in the TV show. Throughout the first series, I picked up on several things I've seen in myself and other autistic friends and colleagues that might well explain why Jessica Jones fans headcanoned Jones as autistic on social media. For many autistics, being specific about things can be difficult, let alone dealing with and managing other people's emotions as well. The pervading stereotype of us not having many friends in some cases has an element of truth in it, while at the same time, I find so many of us can can people please as a form of masking, which then makes us appear popular, let alone some of us being attractive to strangers wanting to ask us questions, even if not to maintain friendships or relationships with us. On the flip of this, Jessca is not someone that pretends to care about other people's emotions or feelings to keep face. If she chooses to care, it is for authentic reasons that she actually cares, not for some unwritten social code or social rule. This is normally when we autistics get called rude, uncooperative, and not nice to be around by non-autistics or even neurotypical people. This can sometimes be why many of us struggled in school and friendships when we were children, and even sometimes in a lot of time in adulthood as well. Jessica Jones wears clothes that are comfortable for her and spends most of the series in loose-fitting trousers, baggy shirts, hoodies, and trainers, and that sort of thing. I began to think about the sensory comforts we autistics have. Like I would generally not be caught dead in suits, but I do enjoy baggy hoodies and dungarees. So we all dress in things that are more sensory pleasing to us, um, and that can sometimes go against fashion in some cases. Uh, she's very socially awkward and would prefer to talk about specific topics than make small talk. In her conversations with Jerry and Malcolm, they learn to be direct to get the most out of her. The how are yous of the world do not run with Jessica Jones. This also leans into how she did not pick up on social cues that her neighbor fancies her as well. Jessica Jones is also quite impulsive and often reacts out of instinct or strong emotions. And these are emotions she does not also does not know how to control either. Even pre-Kilgrave, she was quite anti to large groups of people, which could be an anxiety thing, but was also someone who had few friends. In the Alias comics, her school colleague Peter Parker, who became Spider-Man, refers to her as Coma Girl. And in the flashback scenes in Series 1, the age-old trope of autistics being fired from jobs that we are overqualified for plays out. We are often very good at the jobs that we commit ourselves to, but the usual workplace social etiquettes are where we struggle. Outside of this, Jessica Jones is described as unfriendly, rude, a brawler, cynical, and drunk, particularly unfriend, particularly in particularly unfriendly, rude, and cynical. I've seen used by non-autistics to describe autistic people. We get called rude when we don't follow social norms, while cynical comes from analyzing the patterns in human behavior and predicting outcomes based on that evidence or past evidence. Jessica is also a chronic alcoholic, and although alcoholism is not generally an autistic trait, sensory seeking is better described as chasing dopamine. Um, Alcohol to Jessica might be what allows her to numb her feelings, or it can also be like a safe drink. She likes bourbon whiskey. Simply in autism media that disproportionately focuses on children, we don't ever see that side where autistic adults want safe substances that make them feel good. Um, some may argue this is also common with ADHD as well, and they would be right in that. Jessica Jones does not have it together, and that's okay. We need other representations of autistic people that trouble the narrative. So to conclude then, this paper aimed to discuss Marvel's Jessica Jones in a context of neurodisability and mental unwellness. Yet while films and TV shows about autistic people disproportionately focus on white boys and white men, and also children, there are other stories we need to see and that could be told. Further, to consider Kilgrave in a context of perpetrator also gives another layer to representations of violent men on screen and how those dynamics may be debated in circles that work with victim survivors of male violence and their families. Even 10 years after its first outing, so it'll be 10 years next year in 2025, I still do not think Marvel have produced a better show. Daredevil might rival it, but I think Jessica Jones is the better show. Um, and I think it'll be really good for those of us who are working in the broader qualities sector to use shows like this one to think about popular culture differently. Thank you very much. And if you had questions or anything to say, you can leave them in the comments or send me an email as well. And you can get me at treyventour.com/contact, where you'll be taken to my contact form and just fill out the boxes there.